Hello, I'm Mike Bain from Christian Voice New Zealand. Hey, I want to run a couple of names by you today to see if you recognise them. The first is Janet Dixon and the second is Ali Rubishkin. Now, while those names may not be familiar to you, both have featured in our news almost 12 months apart from one another. In the case of Janet Dixon, she's now an unemployed real estate agent who's awaiting a judicial review to be heard by the courts in New Zealand because she refused to take part in a compulsory Maori values course as part of her employment. Janet Dixon has been a real estate agent for over 30 years, but has recently been given the old DCM, don't come Monday, from the Harcourts agency that she's worked for. Now, in some shape or form, I think most New Zealanders have heard the story. Well, part of it anyway. Television One news service has received some very justified, harsh criticism over its biased, one-sided coverage of the story. And while the media has focused on the cultural significance or insignificance of whether a real estate agent should undergo this cultural training. Now, many callers to Talkback Radio, News Talk ZB, have suggested agents should also be made to undergo training in Asian cultures as well, as, well, let's face it, they appear to be the biggest customers in real estate. So, okay, Janet is fronting up now with $150,000 in legal cost and very likely has grounds for a personal grievance case, but hey, we'll see. So here is why I've brought Janet's situation to your attention. It just doesn't appear to be fair when we're talking about these types of news stories. We're sometimes, probably most times, talking authoritatively based on a misconception what we'd seen on the news was factual. In Exodus 23, it covers a part of the law given to Moses via the Ten Commandments. And verse 1, under the laws of justice mercy heading in your Bible, you can read this. Do not spread false reports. Do not help a guilty person by being a malicious witness. Now look, don't feel too bad about yourself because television news is supposed to be correct. But you weren't to know that, but by repeating what is a false report, you're aiding and abetting television news who were guilty with this story, who showed their cultural bias towards Janet, and you were guilty by repeating it, and therefore you become a malicious person. But so much has been made of the cultural aspect, but in another interview elsewhere, Janet herself put clarity into her position on the reason she's undertaking a judicial review, and it's based on these 2 points. The obvious point is she doesn't agree that understanding Te Reo, Maori, Tikanga and the Treaty of Waitangi is any way a barrier to do with the buying and selling of property. Her refusal is based on this point on concern that an industry body can force its members to complete training on a subject only very peripherally connected to their job under the threat of losing the right to work. It is, she says, a key concern that the online training course of Takatno is a singular perspective of the subject matter when there is much variance in opinion and understanding within iwi, Maoridom and New Zealanders. So, that's one point. But the other is simple, but one which is possibly more important, which is Janet Dixon is a Christian. Now, under the heading in her review, challenging mandatory cultural education that infringes on personal beliefs and principles, and as such, in her own words, many things in Maori culture and practices makes her feel uncomfortable because it's in opposition to her Christian beliefs. And she would not feel right by her God taking part in some practices labelled cultural. So where was that point ever mentioned in the assassination of Janet Dixon's character by mainstream news, who have gone on to suggest her actions were racially motivated? It's the old story. There's 2 sides to every story. That's Janet Dixon. Now, the other name I mentioned was Ali Rubishkin. Such is the backlog in our judicial system, this person who goes by the name of Ali, because whatever it was his parents named him no longer reflects who and what he is. His actions, or to put it into legal context, his assault on British anti-trans activist Kelly J. Minshall, aka Posey Parker, at a Let Women Speak event in Auckland's Albert Park in March last year, which resulted in a near riot, were reported around the world. Now, Rabashkin still stands accused of pouring tomato juice, an act of common assault, but not, please note, not man assaults woman on Kelly J, or aka Posey Parker. Once the news had been made public by the left-wing mainstream media, the police were considering assault charges. Rabashkin claimed his life was in danger and fled the country. Now, while the assault is viewed as minor in comparison to other assaults, the police viewed it as a violation of an individual. Now, eventually, Rabashkin had his day in court and, despite pleading not guilty to the 2 charges, was unsuccessful in having them dismissed, and was scheduled to appear in court in late February this year for justice to be seen to be done. Now, either the court date was moved or the media have just not bothered to report the outcome. So, what do the 2 cases have in common? Both parties are standing by their actions. One whose name and character is being dragged through the media and whose actions are motivated by fairness and belief. The other was motivation to shut down a legal meeting and a viewpoint to protect spaces for real females by pouring tomato juice over a speaker, which was driven by desire, hate and censorship. Now, Rabashkin was hailed in the media as some kind of hero for his actions after being cheered on by the growing agitated crowd. Holding on to your beliefs and doing what's right by the individual has cost Janet Dixon $15,000 plus a loss of future income, but she's prepared to defend herself before the courts. Rabashkin boasted on his social media account his moment of infamy, but instead of defending his actions, fled the country himself, returned and attempted to have the charge dismissed by the courts, and still has a date with the court, and as mentioned, it was deferred to late February. Now, Dixon, who has done no harm to anyone, is called a racist, lost her income stream she had worked for over 30 years without blemish. Now, following Rabashkin's actions, which stoked up an already hate-fueled crowd, forced the victim of the assault to abandon the meeting and had to be manhandled away by her supporters from the rising tide of violence which ensued. Kelly J received no assistance from the police presence, which had left her shaken and clearly fearing for her life, and she too left the country for her own safety. Meanwhile, Rabashkin gets hailed as a hero. Now, at this point, I have to point out and make it clear, the crowd had been primed in the week leading up to Kelly Ray's event by inaccurate stories written and produced by mainstream media. So when I look at justice in this country, I see a slow, overburdened judiciary process, not assisted in any way by people like Rabashkin, failing to admit guilt and prolonging the delays in court. Meanwhile, the media in this country is only interested in the sensational headline, only interested in clickbait, only interested in the portrayal of events which suits its own narrative. Nowhere does it support fairness or anything remotely anywhere near what is truth. So going back to the Bible, and the reasons I go back to the book of Exodus is this. Our system of justice is based upon the foundations of the laws of justice found within the Mosaic law. Exodus 23 verse 1 is quite clear, which I quoted before. Do not spread false reports. Can you hand on heart tell me you believe our media in this country is not guilty of spreading false information? And based on your answer, can you honestly say that you believe by repeating their lies you're not helping them, the guilty, by being malicious witnesses? So often we hear the headline, but we don't hear the full and balanced story. And to be honest, as a former member of the media, I can honestly say you will never hear the full story unless you look for it. Verse 2 of Exodus 21 also warns us not to follow the crowd in wrongdoing. when giving testimony to pervert justice by siding with the crowd. And yet, if you look at all the stories printed before and after this incident, you're left in no doubt who they supported. When we're wronged, we're all looking for justice, and regardless of who we are or what you are, everyone is entitled to their time in front of the judiciary where the facts and evidence are produced and not in the court of public opinion. You know, we're fortunate. We live in a country where the countries do have the final say and not the journalist. In both examples I've outlined today, I hope justice is seen to be fair and the mainstream media report back the court's decision with the same veracity as they reported it initially. But with recent news regarding the demise of our main player of the media landscape in this country, it would appear that there's very little sympathy over the outcome. One could say that News Hub failed the sniff test.